band? Yeah. Do you want me to sing some more? No, you're good? All right, you've had enough. That's good. That's a good answer. We had one of our best moments as a band last night because as we started to play our song, somebody in the audience said, "I know that song. I heard it on YouTube." We were like, "Oh, nobody ever says that." That's a good feeling. Somebody actually knows something you've done. Wonderful. So thanks for coming out this morning to help finish this up. This is probably the most important piece of this puzzle, and I know those who are here in the room understand that, and we appreciate that. Conferences are tough. It's tough to find time off to be there and be a part of it, but we thank you for pushing through that. And I think we'll get some interesting insights today, and we appreciate it because it's all about what you think, not what I think or anybody else. So this is really good. We have some folks here today to help listen to your outbriefs. We're going to run through the briefs, not in alphabetical order. We'll bring you up in different order. But you'll be kind of briefing our front row, and they may have some questions for you during your briefs. And then when we're done with the briefings, we'll bring the front row up here to kind of speak about what they've heard in the conference in the outbriefs, some parting thoughts. Then we have a video from Mr. Richard Bennett, who's going to give us a message on where things stand with human rights. We'll close it up and have some food and fellowship. So today's the easy day, the short day, and we appreciate you being here for that. So if we can get Group E's representative, Naheed? D. Or D, yes, we'll start with you. Perfect. Great.
A very good morning, everybody, while it's still morning. So I'm in a bit of an unusual situation here. None of my group members that was planned or had the ambition to moderate were present here. But I guess, and I'm sure they've done a fantastic job yesterday. Yesterday I wasn't here, but my co-facilitator, Nazila Jamshidi, did a fantastic job. So I'm just going to read through the notes that they had prepared yesterday. So I'm going to take no credit of whatever discussion had happened before me. So please also excuse me if I cannot represent whatever they had discussed. I hope I can do a good job. So what the group discussed yesterday was about economy and how entrepreneurship can support Afghanistan in this situation. And some very interesting questions were discussed. One of them was what strategies can be employed to empower Afghans economically while not engaging with the regime or the unrecognized regime. I think a common theme that emerged was implementing a business approach. I mean, bypassing the regime and working more with the people, with business people and entrepreneurs, and encouraging local initiatives and ideas. Establishing nonprofits and microfinance initiatives, which could be a little bit challenging. I'm so sorry, I might just add my own thoughts about the issue as I feel very hardly about this topic. Given the current situation with the finances and transactions, which adds to the costs of supporting small initiatives, but still this was one of the main solutions that came. Most importantly, something that came out was creating tools for organizations to collaborate, given that there are no coordination mechanisms or lack of them at the moment in Afghanistan. And focusing on markets within the country where businesses can offer services and products. And I think this really goes to the issue of demand. I talked to a few businesses 2 weeks ago, and one of their main complaints was if you produce, there's no demand. There was a woman entrepreneur who was producing, at least getting contracts, 2 or 3 numbers of contracts each fall for making winter clothes. Now she doesn't get those contracts because there's no demand. When people do not have money to spend, there are less options for entrepreneurs to produce and make income. So this was also how international communities and community and UN can collaborate and focus on markets within the country. The second topic that was discussed was more regional connectivity, as how the regional countries can help entrepreneurship and businesses in Afghanistan. A very interesting comment was utilizing technology for market expansion. If the government is not involved, if you want to not work through the government, develop softwares connecting local businesses with businesses abroad, especially in the region, so that there is a sense of partnership. And also facilitating overseas exhibition for businesses and local initiatives and identifying global demand. The next question was how can NGOs support and contribute to growth of local women-led businesses? Again, one of the issues that is also close to my heart is job training and mentorship through vocational learning and vocational skills, something that has always been brought up, but I don't think the extent that is needed in Afghanistan is being paid attention to. And what does the UN, what is UN's role here is also local collaboration in supporting more local businesses. And something that I don't know what was the exact purpose beyond it was federal funding support that they had mentioned. I think they're thinking more in terms of putting conditionalities and milestones for the Taliban to achieve in order for the UN to act on the same manner. This talks more about conditionalities. Last but not the least, what ways can we get people to have access to cash, which was also proposed as one of the solutions, more cash transfers versus in-kind contribution, is addressing bank confidence. And I think also managing the withdrawal limits was one of the solutions that came up as part of the working group. And empowering women financially, developing strategies to promote women financial independence through their local-led initiatives. I hope I've done justice to their notes. I think this was pretty much what they had discussed yesterday. Thank you so much.
Any thoughts? Questions? Further questions I should explore?
Yes, about the questions for the other groups. The question I have is Afghanistan so what we people.
Do you want me to respond and just get a few questions in there? So I don't know about, again, disclaimer about what group has discussed, but my thoughts, I think businesses need predictability. And from my experience working in Afghanistan in development sector, I think, for example, if you want to have a mining contract, you want to be sure that that law that is managing the affairs of mining is not going to change in the next year. But what happened, for example, just one example, in Afghanistan, our mining law got amended, I think, more than 10 times with a span of few years. And this was just one example of unpredictability and the larger sector. And I think for the small sectors, I also have the feeling that business is about taking risk. And even now, when I talk to people, people are ready to take risks as far as there is demand, that they know their products will be sold within a few weeks or a few months and that they have a long-term contract in place. So creating that kind of demand right now is the main issue. There can be conflicting views, but I think this is the way forward.
I think it's on.
Thank you. That's very interesting. This may not be a fair question because you were not, I know you're working from the notes, so I can't really ask you, did they discuss something unless it's in the notes. But I thought you were very correct. The group was very correct about the need to do more business, more private business, more NGOs. One of the difficult issues that I just wondered where people thought it's very easy to say you want to totally avoid the Taliban, but it's very difficult to do it. It's very difficult for NGOs in the field to completely avoid the Taliban. And so I wondered what your thinking was about how do you define how much is acceptable? And how do Afghans, whether inside or in the diaspora, engage with the international community? Because if you have a total view of no engagement is acceptable, you may cut off even humanitarian aid. You're always vulnerable because they can force engagement, and then you have a choice of cutting off or engaging. So how do you, what are you thinking about, where do you go in this gray middle area? How do you define can you define how much is acceptable, or can you define where it's unacceptable, and how do you talk coherently to the international community about what they should allow?
Just quickly on that, Ambassador, very valid one. I'm going to quote a recent article that I found very interesting. It was by Afghanistan Analyst Network. I think it was published a few days ago. It's a differentiating between aid diversion, corruption, and aid misuse. And sometimes we kind of get a little bit hazy in between these terms. Sometimes aid diversion cannot be misuse, cannot be corruption. It is just the way that we cannot control, as you absolutely said. It's a regime that's controlling the whole population. So there is no way you're providing aid and get away with it. But I think what's important, again, it's difficult for me to talk about the red lines in those conditionalities as what is the limit that it shouldn't be diverted from. There needs to be a conversation between all donors as what is the limit, what are those untouchables that they can agree upon, whether it is in terms of services provided or it's in terms of monetary value that gets to the population. And I think what we're missing right now is the actual value that is going to the population in terms of aid and even development initiatives rather than how much we have dispersed. I hope I've answered it. And I don't know if they have discussed those issues here. I'm so sorry, I wasn't here again yesterday.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.
So we're going to move to these quickly. Get to. So round of applause. Okay, Group E, have your representatives? Group E? Totally ready.
Going old school here, so back to the, we don't have laptops or anything.
Can't wait to see that bag.
I know, we have a dog, Sarah did that. We're very touchy about. Can I just? Okay. Salam everyone, good morning. My name is Neela Latif. I'm the CEO of Pillars for Humanity, and we were in charge of the resettlement group. Our team came up with a basic introduction of what we thought were the most important topics. These two lovely, this lovely lady, this gentleman, will go into the details, but what we were able to kind kind of break down each issue that we saw as first responders, as people out in the field, what our assessments were, and how we should break this down. What we thought was the important issues was domestic violence, mental health, cultural interrogation, technology, and needs assessment. And, culture, competency, and trafficking. So those are the issues. And what we did is we broke it down into those, but we've broken them down into different areas. And we have this, our pie charts are not that detailed apparently. The last one. So, or you wanted?
Oh, I want to go with this. Yeah. Okay. So, hi everyone. Yes, I want to put this down. Okay. Assalamu alaikum and hi everyone. I'm Ruqya Samim. I just introduced myself. I came here from South Bend, Indiana to just attend this conference. And what we did in the group was just an introduction to resettlement. We are not here. We didn't discuss to solve the problem because it's a huge ongoing issue which cannot be solved in 1 hour or 2 hours of speaking. We just broadly spoke about the resettlement, and our objective, as I mentioned, was not to solve this problem. So we here as first respondents and also as people on the ground, or actually as people who are going through this process, we identified some priorities, some issues that these issues are illustrated in this biopsychosocial assessment, which are issues in each category that all should be considered under the resettlement program. And my dear friend will go into details that what we discuss and what we categorize in each part.
So basically, it was divided into 3 different categories. The top was, and all 3 of these are kind of overlapping each other. And when we're talking about one, we basically have a lot of elements that are overlapping one another. So the first one that we actually thought was most important is educational issues. As you can see here, we thought a very basic need assessment is necessarily to be done. And then we thought that culturally appropriate educational models that are state-specific is very important because then states can basically tailor their own programming. And then we talked about a very comprehensive cultural orientation that would pretty much include all aspects of education into new culture, includes parental involvement from, very aspects of how to get involved in the schooling of their kids and pretty much everything else. And then the second topic that we discussed was mental health. And if you go back to the mental health, the mental health aspects of it was also discussed. That includes a variety of different issues, including domestic violence, destigmatizing mental health, addressing the whole family structures, needs of mental health, cultural competency, trafficking, basic needs, and any other involvements with the mental health. So basically, healthy parenting was also another issue that was discussed as part of the mental health. And the last one was that we don't have it here. The last one was basically socioeconomic integration. That definitely speaks to everything from finding employment, settling down, finding apartments, and anything towards social economic mobility. And this is where we stopped because we didn't have much time to go further down into the topic. Next stops are to prioritize those issues and see where we can find resources to tackle all these issues, where those programmings exist, where do they need improvement, and where do we need to actually introduce new programming, and how can we finance that and find the resources for them. We also went through what needs can be added and funded as a whole brand new elements into this integration experience. But again, I have to emphasize on the regional differences, because we come across a number of different issues and topics when we discussed how different states are dealing with those issues differently. And to end it, we realize that this is a very ongoing task that needs advocacy in the first place, strategy in the second place. We need to strategize how we actually move forward. Planning, we need precise planning throughout the country. We also need budgeting, and after all, and at the very last stop, a piloting of what is actually being introduced as part of the solution to the problem.
Well, I'm going to let the front row here ask you some questions. I'll take these over your hands.
Thank you.
Stay in the hot seat.
I'll jump right in and ask some questions. So your group only looked at resettlement in the United States, correct?
Correct.
And so what would it take to get more Afghans coming in? And are we prepared, if we could pull that off, are we prepared to take more?
I mean, we can't really answer for resettlement agencies. We don't know what their, ability is at the moment and what the funding is. As far as, I'm not sure if this is working. As far as their funding, none of us are in the resettlement sector. However, seeing what we ground as first responders, it was very difficult for them, obviously, because of all the budget cuts that had happened in previous administration, and to rebuild that. As far as capability of doing that, it depends all on what budgeting they get, as far as we would know. But as first responders, this is our view, we don't get enough of the support that we need to help. What our goal is to improvise and help resettlement agencies be able to be successful. We don't want to create new cycles. We don't want to change what it is already exists for hundreds of years. We just want to help and support them.
And if I may add, by the way, Khalil Arab with Combined Arms, I'm actually working with a lot of resettlement agencies in Texas directly, and the problem of staffing and resources were actually somehow tackled in the past 2 years. Now, here's the meaning part. Yes, we do have capacity in certain places that we can actually take on more. However, it cannot be done only by the resettlement agency. There are new other initiatives like Welcome.us, who is investing a lot on other local organizations that they're doing a lot of tremendous good works. And I think if we support those local organizations more, there's actually plenty of more that we can do with their involvement.
And what about the proposal that ordinary Americans sponsor refugees? Do you think that, they sort of kicked that off with Ukrainians, and there are Ukrainian American Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like the very first part.
The first partnership with Afghans and a lot of local area nonprofits helped Welcome US with that process.
So my question is, do you think the American public's going to continue then to respond to that? Is that going to be a way forward then from now on?
Can I?
Go ahead.
If I may, so the question is, we need to actually gather data on how many families, individuals were already brought through that initiative into the United States. My fear is that the American public would actually be reluctant toward the Afghan cause as opposed to, for instance, comparing to Ukrainian. But again, this is an incredible initiative, and we should work on advocacy and awareness throughout the American public, making sure that people understand there is a possibility where they can support, and we have to actually tap into that resource. I think it would be a great way.
Amy, do you want to go? Go.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I love that family reunification was up there on your list. I think we cannot treat families as being in a vacuum. For everybody who's here, they have people who are still there. We've increased our capacity to 125,000 a year. CARE has a mandate to move 5,000 people a month. They're not there yet, but there are all kinds of contracts out there that will get them there. How can resettlement, not just resettlement agencies, but community organizations support the DS 4317 process of helping? And is that something that can be in that realm, or do we need something else stood up to help people file that paperwork to get family members here, in addition to other pathways?
Thanks.
I can go ahead, but I don't.
No, you go ahead, and then we can
Because
actually add.
okay.
Of course.
So from my perspective as being an on-ground nonprofit with like you guys, I think we do need to have other platforms such as REACT, such as other organizations that are doing legal asylum or any kind of legal work to support the existing systems that we have, just improve it, make it better. I don't believe that resettlement on its own, they don't have the manpower or the capability to do all the work. As nonprofits, we can come in and help them. So that's my kind of belief on that. Maybe that's not the way it's looked outside. John? No?
I have one other.
I actually have the
Can I do one?
I actually had a different take on that because we kind of went over this a couple of times. I think that the federal agencies should put a lot of pressure on resettlement agencies, making sure that that part is done by resettlement agencies, because families are going through the resettlement process. This should be an element that it needs to be included into that resettlement package, and I think it should be put on the resettlement agency, make sure they're working with the clients to get that part done.
I just want to add something to that I agree with, that it should be done anti-resettlement process, because resettlement cannot be completed without family reunification. And also we discussed during our discussion that under the part of mental health, that what comes first for families is we have happy refugees, and happy refugees are not, it won't exist without being with their families and without family reunification. So I think it should be part of that resettlement, and there should be more resources allocated to that to be a more easy or cost-effective way for the families to at least do this for their immediate family members. Yeah.
Round of applause for this group. Thank you. Group A. Steve Penn will come up top. My thoughts on that. Cover all the bases.
You said I can hang it here?
Yeah, you can hang it there. There's some tape.
Or do you want to hold it?
There's some tape.
معین صاحب شما می آمدین صحبت میکردین چی هست؟
See if this paper here's that tape.
But I have to be able to see it.
Take it.
Okay, good morning. If it's morning, I don't even know what time it is. but salam. We had a really great discussion last night, and it went on for a long time. But basically, we talked about two questions. One was on governance, the other one was on human rights. On governance, we have divided the topic into two categories. One is on democracy, the other is on the concept of decentralization. And so I've just taken some notes together with our colleagues. I'll share some of it. I may not be able to cover everything. We also did not conclude. We did not come to any conclusions. There was a lot of emphasis on the need to further discuss these issues because they are difficult topics. We cannot resolve the challenges of Afghanistan in a couple of hours is what the group kept on saying. But in any case, there was an ask to discuss and define what democracy is. In order to do that, several factors were introduced. One suggestion was that it has to be contextualized. There was not a lot of comments against democracy, but there were comments to make it more fit into the context of Afghanistan. There were other factors that were discussed that could be impediments or that could also come in alignment with this concept of democracy in Afghanistan, such as tribalism. Another important issue was that some people do not understand democracy as a value, but perhaps more as a method. For instance, if democracy can create justice in a society, then it is desired. What's important is that value is justice, and democracy is the means. And so if there are other forms of governance in Afghanistan that can provide those values that people yearn for, then those are welcome to be discussed. There was also a lot of discussion on this, whether this concept is Western or is it local? Could there be local aspects to it? And that even if it is a Western concept, that it is not a bad thing. West has produced things that are good and that we are using, and East has also produced things that the West is using. There were issues of, for example, religions that have come from the East. And then iPhones from the West that are being used in Afghanistan. So if something comes from the West, it doesn't mean that just because its originating place is the West that we throw it out. There was a lot of discussion on the role of religion, how that mixes or doesn't mix with democracy. In this context, again, we did not come to any conclusions, but that it should maybe be aligned with or democracy be aligned with that the other way around. The role of Taliban was discussed. It sounds like contradictory to the topic, but in the future governance, where do the Taliban fit? Again, some people said there were varying discussions on where they fit, but the majority, I understand, said that they shouldn't be in a leading role, but that they can be part of whatever comes. Also, there was an evaluation of what democracy did in the past 20 plus years, and there was a lot of emphasis that democracy actually did not fail, but we failed it. It wasn't democracy. Actors failed democracy in Afghanistan. There was problem in implementation, and also it was not given enough time to flourish in the country. There was also, whatever form of governance we talk about, we also need to talk about the status of Afghanistan in the region and in the world. So there was a lot of discussion on this concept of neutrality. Again, no conclusions, but that is an important issue. Human rights was another important issue that was discussed, that any form of governance has to protect and guarantee that. Also, that while we discuss forms of governance, that we also have to create platforms that can unify the populations. So that was all the discussion on democracy. And then one form of maybe governance was this concept of centralization or decentralization. There was a lot of discussion on this. One good question that came was, we have to define whatever it is that we want, what does that look like? If it is centralized, what does it look like? If it's decentralized, what does it look like? But in general, there were three stances on this question. There was a big number of people in the room that were pro-decentralization. The second biggest was, let us not decide right now. Let a process tell us what type of government or what type of governance we would want. The third category was almost pro-centralization, because their fear was that if you talk about decentralization, immediately federalism comes to your mind as a form of it, and that could lead to disintegration of the country and further separations. But there was lots of good substantive debate, discussion on this. There was also a lot of emphasis on the role of creating systems and revolving whatever type of governance we come up with around systems rather than individuals, which has been the case a lot of times. There was a proposal to discuss and create a national narrative, discuss the national identity among ourselves, because the Taliban may have a narrative. What is a counter narrative to that? And what is a big narrative or one narrative that can rally all Afghans around itself? And that we need to create that. I think also on the issue of Afghanistan's status in the region, there was a focus on shifting away from war politics to economic politics in order to get along with the region. And so again, the concept of neutrality. But on whatever decentralization, centralization, another concept was that it is a spectrum and we should not think about it in binary terms. It's not like we will either have a decentralized country or a centralized country, but that is, it depends on the degree to which we all feel comfortable with. And so we might go through stages in order to get to wherever we want, but we have to start somewhere. Last point, in this conversation also there was a lot of focus on human rights. That took me a while, but thank you.
We have time for
Okay. All right. Okay. Awesome. I guess one important aspect of democracy is the designing of the Constitution. So how you design the Constitution, separation of power, checks and balances, and centralization and decentralization of power, right? So I think one of the problems with the Constitution of 2004 was the fact that it concentrated a lot of power into the figure of presidency as well as in the capital. And there wasn't any checks and balances, although there was some level of separation of powers, but we know that in a lot of cases, in a lot of disputes between the president and the parliament, the Supreme Court would go in favor of the president. So I guess the question I have in that particular regard, and I really like, the idea of contextualizing democracy as well as thinking about centralization and decentralization in terms of the degree of what people want. And I think there is a lot of consensus when we are talking about, for example, whether your governor should be elected or not, right? So we did a number of studies about this, and although people disagree on the issue of, for example, whether you like federal or a centralized system of governance, people would just pick and choose. And then if you ask them what is federal system, a lot of people have very vague ideas about what federal system is and what a unitary system is. But if you ask them, do you want your local governor to be elected, there seems to be some level of consensus between all groups and so on. So the question I'm asking is did you also talk and discuss about the other constitutional arrangements, like, for example, the electoral systems, the party systems, the presidential versus parliamentary systems? Which one you think is better and more useful in terms of having a sustainable democracy going in the country?
I'm very sorry that I will have a very short answer to that, and that is that there were some references, but we did not discuss those questions of constitution and other forms. But thank you so much. Those are very important points.
That's a great way to end that. Because well, one more round. Tirelessly during the
Thank you so much.
Group B and C, that was A, right? Who would like to go next? Don't knock me over.
Group C needs 2 minutes.
Okay, so the other group then. Who represents the other group? If your group hasn't spoken yet, that's you.
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum everyone. Our group is on governance, and the question, we'll start with the question first. What policies should Afghanistan choose with its neighbors and regional powers given Afghan resources and vulnerabilities? So, like many things when it comes to Afghanistan, we had differing opinions and contrasting views in regards to coming to a decisive solution about this question. But assuming the fact that we have established a functioning, inclusive, legitimate government and a united society, assuming this fact, so this is post the current situation, then we did come to an agreement that of the following. Afghanistan should pursue a policy of neutrality with neighbors, regional powers that would be enforced and guaranteed by the UN. This is to come to an agreement of not instigating neighbors or each other, vice versa, whether they instigate us or we instigate them. Not interfering in each other's affairs, but instead pursuing a more of a multi-alignment approach. So Afghanistan should identify areas of cooperation with neighboring and regional countries that would be in the mutual interest of both countries. For example, we believe things such as counter-narcotics, border security, countering radicalism and counter-terrorism. So we believe that this would be in the long-term interest of Afghanistan to essentially come to pursue self-reliance instead of solely relying on foreign powers to always prop us up and keep us alive. So, but like I said in the beginning, this can only be achieved, all of this can be done and established if we establish true unity. And that is by having a legitimate, inclusive governance that achieves social justice. So not a proxy terrorist regime that rules by force, nor a puppet leader that is installed by the West, but a leader and the system that is chosen by the people of Afghanistan. That is the first question. For the second question, which is number 4, what specific actions can UNAMA or concerned countries take in support of marginalized social and political groups in Afghanistan. So the answer, or the solution that we came up with regarding this is kind of twofold. What they should do and what they should not do. So first of all, what they should do, what UNAMA and regional countries should do is enforce their existing mandate and act upon it. UNAMA and the international community should continue to hold the Taliban accountable by condemning their crimes as well as investigating and recording and reporting their crimes. Not just hollow statements of being disappointed in the de facto authorities, but at the very least identifying them by their name and who they actually are. So they should also continue to provide humanitarian assistance. This is a given. This is the bare minimum that should continue, as well as continue advocating for the rights of women and human rights. World foreign ministers should hold, high-level meetings with non-Taliban officials as well, opposition groups, resistance groups, not just sitting with the Taliban and ignoring everyone else. Just as they sit with the Taliban and hold meetings with them, they should do that with the opposition as well. Just as they sit there and have photo ops with them, photographs of their meetings and videos of those meetings should be taken with the opposition as well, so that the world understands that we're not just normalizing a terrorist regime, that there is an alternative. In things that, continuing, UNAMA and the US should also, these are things that they should do, yeah. So I said that they should sit with the non-Taliban officials as well, but they should also take a neutral stance in regards to the opposition and resistance groups. Even if it's not necessarily supporting them, but at least acknowledging them, that they exist. And I'm going to get to things that they should not do. So the UN and world powers should not grant official recognition to the Taliban. This is the bare minimum. This is a given. Do not recognize them, because they haven't done anything to deserve that. It's been 2 years and girls still can't go to school. It's been 2 years and they still have a suicide bombing unit. 2 years and they're still persecuting every ethnic group in the country, particularly in the north. Forced displacements. These are things that go unnoticed. It's not just girls' schools. So that's what world powers and UNAMA and the United Nations, United States, they need to do. In terms of not recognizing the Taliban due to those things. They shouldn't whitewash or normalize the Taliban. Don't give them leverage. And at the same time, this goes back to the point I made earlier, do not condemn opposition groups. It doesn't make any sense to continue giving a chance to a terrorist regime whose history is known, their resume is well known. It's been almost 30 years of what they have done to Afghanistan, to the people of Afghanistan. We give them chances and they give them leverage, but when it comes to for a second, thinking about an alternative, which is, well, what about this resistance group that is democratic, that is for the people, that upholds women's rights, that is saying that we want a democratic elected system for human rights, for unity, for social justice. That group gets condemned. The minute that's brought up, they just get brushed off and say, no, that's not a possibility. So at the very least, do not condemn them. Give them a chance, or just stay neutral on them. And last but not least, and this should be obvious, do not dictate to Afghans how we should choose our future. So that pretty much summarizes those two questions.
Great. We have time for one great.
But I have a question about the
the other giving funds and trying. So how?
That's a good question. Well, I don't know if you know, did you notice that we mentioned neutrality in the beginning? Okay, all right. So you're saying regarding that, how do we achieve it? Okay. Are we allowed to tag team to our team members? So I want to defer to our ambassador here. Yes.
Well, yeah, I think that's that less, I think, here in the Republic tried so hard, and even those 6 countries came together in 2002 and signed a declaration committing to non-interference, but unfortunately they really haven't obeyed that, delivered on that. So then we discussed how I think the UN Secretariat, especially at the Secretary General level, much if you think about, second term Kofi Annan, to really engage with the P5, who do have a consensus on the formation of an inclusive and representative government, and to get him to actually deliver on that. If you just recently noticed, Russians spoke about the need, and they called and even threatened the Taliban. If you don't do this, then there are alternatives, which means that the resistance could grow, which means that Russia could support that. And also, of course, China could do the same because China is very concerned about ETIM. But we discussed the importance of, neutrality plus multi-alignment, where these countries actually commit and guarantee, and under the UN auspices, on the one hand, and for Afghanistan to be aligned with all of them and welcome them to invest in Afghanistan and to, form a win-win plus win relationship where they not only invest, but also, for example, China to build railways and roads consistent with, Belt and Road for, Russia, Central Asia as well. Uzbekistan is actively seeking to, do transit trade with South Asia, especially Pakistan through Afghanistan. And so if they agree to that, and then we also discussed that Afghanistan maintain our neutrality, especially learning from the lessons of the past 20 years, where we really sided with India against Pakistan, and we just saw that, India brought so much pressure on our ambassador that he had to close. Now, here's the largest democracy and, proponent of at least human rights, this and that, but unfortunately, now they are more kind of in their self-interest. They're engaging with the Taliban, something that they shouldn't do. So what we're saying that if they see their best long-term interest in the security and stability of Afghanistan, and that they can choose between an island of instability, violence, chaos, war in Afghanistan, or an island of stability and peace, whereby they all, come together, benefit from, investing in Afghanistan and infrastructure connectivity projects which were discussed, and Afghanistan doing our part. So it's in this slide that we discussed neutrality plus multi-alignment.
Jason, there was a question in the back.
We're going to take...
Okay. All right, just wanted to let you know.
Come on up. Don't have 2 more minutes. Teachers. I was hoping the students did have perfect support.
Do you have it up? Have it up?
Yeah, let's just give it a minute so they get their presentation up.
So he did a great job putting a presentation together. That's why we needed that 2 minutes.
Let's go ahead and... Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just, yeah.
Well done.
No?
No, it just needs to load up right here. No, 30 seconds. All right. So, I think it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, distinguished attendees. I'm Kumail Nazari, and today I'll be trying my best to provide the insights drawn from our breakout workshop, where we were focusing on the dynamics surrounding opposition against the Taliban and the potential future role of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Mrs. Gayson, Yuri will be joining me to address any questions. So I guess we'll be presenting together. So yeah, getting straight into it, if we can get to the background slide.
We have a...
Sorry?
Go ahead.
All right. One more. There we go. Yeah, so central to our discussions was the theme of collaborative opposition against the Taliban. This is just a bit of a background on the Afghanistan landscape, which we believe that needs to be understood prior to delving deeper into these such discussions. Afghanistan has historically been a diverse country, rich in cultures and ethnicities. It's a country comprised and composed of ethnic minorities. There is no majority. And so the emergence of the Taliban and its impact on the socio-political landscape, these are things that we believe were prerequisitory kind of understandings that need to be developed, again, prior to going further into the topic of the discussion. And the challenge of establishing cohesion and cohesive government and resistance to extremism. Yeah, so these are a few of the background. There was a lot more. We tried to make it as summarized as possible, but yeah, let's go. So our first question was, how can opposition groups in Afghanistan mobilize and collaborate to present a unified alternative to the Taliban? If we can move to the next slide. Yes. So in short, the outcomes, as far as outcomes, the opposition to the Taliban is unified, okay, in one sense. It's unified and not unified. When we mentioned that they are unified, Mrs. Royan, who is one of the leaders of our group, she recently had made a statement in the United Nations saying when it comes to the anti-Taliban or opposition forces, everyone is on the same page when it comes to being opposed to the Taliban. We may have our differences, just as was mentioned that, you know, the differences in terms of ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, whatever they may be, where we are unified is in the opposition itself. Now, the how or where we differentiate and disagree, it doesn't take away from this unity of opposition to their ideology, right? And for collaboration to happen, civil society is necessary and required to, and they can play the utmost role, in, of course, with the help of the international community, the help of civil society, Afghanistan's diaspora all around the world, and that was the general outcomes from our first question. Question 2, the future role of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now this was, I think...
Tough and complicated one.
Exactly, a very tough and complicated question. And there was not necessarily a consensus reached. If we can move to the next slide, please. These, however, both of these points were, if not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but agreed among our group that the role, again, of civil society, international community, and unifying opposition groups, as discussed in the first question, is something that was, agreed upon by all. And the Taliban ideology needing better comprehension, the power dynamics, the fragmentation of the group. These are things that, unfortunately, the amount of work that has been done, it's not extensive enough. Seeing you, Jason, it just reminded me, some of those conversations in relation to the nature of this group being, a proxy group or other actors having a role in not just influencing but supporting the group itself, right? These are matters which they need more work to be done.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
I think the opposition groups who are around the world, we are unified and we want to fight the terrorist group. I think on a personal level and more as a group level, I don't think we do have a comprehensive understanding of the Taliban. I think that's our homework as an opposition group to do first. For instance, if we don't do that, I don't think we can predict how the Taliban are going to function in Afghanistan in the future. I think we have a general idea of how they're functioning, but I don't think we know enough about their internal politics. The reason we need to do our researches, the reason we need to discuss about it and be familiar with it is because that is going to create us, the opposition groups, to come together and develop solidarity and strategize together. So if we don't do that inside Afghanistan, if we say, I don't want to know about you, but I don't think we can strategize it better. There you go.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, there were divergent views, of course, right? Just as I'm sure was the case with all of the groups. And while some, did see it as predetermined that, engagement with them may be necessary, there were also opinions that were shared that, a good Talib is a dead Talib. So that, I just wanted to make that clarification that, despite the overwhelming majority, I believe, having been in agreement, there was also divergent views. And yeah. So, yes, if there are any questions.
We're going to take their questions in a minute. I love the idea of homework because that's what's going to happen with the next panel. They're going to give you some more homework.
You can move to the next one.
All the questions you want. Got a great spread laid out. Y'all can jump off and Ambassador Newman, Dr. Mubashir, Malalai, Habibi, and Richard, Hosnajan, and Dr. Nilo Farsaki and Amy Martin to come up and take a seat. We're going to finish the last part of the conference. Any place you like. All the chairs are yours. It's like a movie theater. Just slide on in. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Great. So thanks again to all of the working groups. We didn't give out any easy questions, and that was purposeful. And the idea of this conference is not to solve all of the questions we had in front of us. The idea was to get the conversation going so you can have more conversations later and work more on those and fine-tune the questions. So I really appreciate all the effort you put into it. I walked around to every group and sat in and listened to it, as did other conference organizers. And it was really fantastic to see the conversations and how detailed you got. But to come up with some conclusions, what you did, that's really powerful. So We're going to give each person on this panel about 3 minutes each to give us a great thought or give you some more homework, ask a great question of what needs to be done. So this is a time to take some notes and think about what they've observed, what they've heard, what they've listened to, and we'll just work our way down the line. We'll start with you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I've got my watch in my hand. I'm going to try to do this in 3 minutes. This is not normally a trait of these groups. So, first of all, I just wanted to say, coming late to this, I was struck by how much realism there is, how much seriousness there is in the discussions. It's very important. I congratulate you on the fact that you're having to continue. I think a lot of the different kinds of questions that you will need to address, from my point of view, in the continuing questions are how you get beyond the general statements to get to something which is meaningful. And those will be the actually much more difficult questions. We had one this morning that I asked about where do you draw the line for NGOs and for internationals on engaging with the Taliban in the delivery of aid or in doing business. If the line is nothing, it's clear, but almost impossible to do anything. Everything after that becomes a lot of grays and very hard, and yet that's where you need to explore. I was struck also in the last panel, kind of similar question. Unity, yes, we have unity, but not really. This unity of principle is a very nice starting point that is almost totally useless for action unless you can go beyond it. And, you know, the whole history of Afghanistan in the last 40 years is of the disunity of opposition groups and the constant fragmentation. So the challenge and a lot of questions there is how do you translate unity in principle into the ability to stick together with some kind of program, which in the end of the day often means somebody has to be in charge. Because what I see often is statements of unity, but nobody's in charge, so the first time somebody has to take action, everybody has their own views, and whether it's the 1400 group or many other marvelous youth groups that came along, they come apart when they have to act. And so, huge challenge there. I just wanted to take the last minute and a half, though, to turn to one thing which I thought, because some of these things are very important, but you are focusing quite a ways out. But one of the groups, the second one that talked to us, was talking about the resettlement issues. And there I just wanted to kind of flip the question, and perhaps it's questions of obstacles. What are the obstacles within the Afghan community to achieving faster, better resettlement? What are the obstacles that keep people from taking perhaps jobs that are below status? What are the issues that cause, right now, a huge, or a pretty large part of the Afghan asylum community is settled in areas that are really bad for integration, where the cost of living is high, where the jobs are low because there are too many people, and where there are too many people competing for the same things. What are the issues that cause people to stay there, and what is the responsibility, or responsibility maybe is the wrong word, how does the community find in itself the ways of moving or dealing with these obstacles that are not probably matters of money itself? They're not things that are likely to be solved by people from the outside. They have to be solved from the inside. And so I hope that those issues will ones that people will look at. My impression, an outsider, so maybe wrong and somewhat distant from this problem, but my impression is people don't like to be lectured to by people from outside the community. And yet there is a long experience of one community after another coming to this country, and maybe there are some things. Just a series of questions. Just leave the question. What are the obstacles? Well, I won't shout into that one. As soon as I did that, it came on. What are the obstacles within the community itself, within individuals, to more rapid, more successful integration, to being able to feed themselves and provide for their families and make a good life? What are those obstacles within the community? How can those obstacles be overcome from within the community? Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, I'm Ann Richard from Freedom House, and I'm working on the Afghan Human Rights Coordination Mechanism. And so I brought, a view from a human rights perspective to some of the things we've heard this morning. And I wanted to say that I think it's very clear that Afghan society, as it exists right now under the de facto authorities, as the UN calls them, is taking steps which will cripple it later. And so this is going to make it much, much harder for us to achieve something much better in the future. We look at and see the impact of Taliban actions on rights, and I would encourage you to go look at what USIP has done in listing all the various edicts and tracking them over time that have been imposed on the Taliban people, and especially on women, of course. It's on their website. It's a very good job. There are some things about the demographics of Afghanistan, the trends in Afghanistan that are sort of forgotten by all of us. First, a long time ago, I was told Afghanistan is a country of widows. And so under the Taliban, when women are imprisoned in their own houses and they can't go outside, they don't have the authority to do things, this just makes a bad situation worse. Second, we see then a youth bulge, which is interesting, especially for those of us in the US who have been sort of astonished at what good relations we have with Vietnam. It's partly because they have people who were born and grown up without war with the US. And so that's one interesting sort of factoid I wanted to share with you all. But more concerning to me is related to youth is that we're seeing a country emerge that is a country of uneducated girls and boys, and what a shame that is. Uneducated girls because they're not allowed to go to school. Undereducated boys because the education they're getting is not particularly good, and so this undermines future society. And third, and I don't know to what extent this is solid facts, but the sense that there is an increase in the number of young women and girls committing suicide. And that's a really, really tragic outcome that is happening in a country well used to tragedy. So even if not all of us are human rights activists, we need to fold some of these demographic facts and trends into planning, or at least preparing for the next phase. Another piece of this, of course, that I think did come up is on the resettlement issues was the mental health outcomes, the mental health situation for people in the country as well. It's very debilitating. So I would throw in from a personal point of view that I worry about tensions in the future about those who left and those who stayed, and I realize I'm talking to a group of people who were able to get out. Finally, for me, the big question then to put to all of you is, and I think this comes out from some of the presentations we heard, who can play constructive roles? In the resettlement group E, there was the idea that nonprofits could potentially do more in the U.S. And it was funny because from my point of view, having been in government, both the resettlement agencies and other groups are all nonprofits, but it sounded like when you were talking that nonprofits can help the resettlement agencies as sort of a different class. Perhaps those first group of nonprofits can be more nimble. Secondly, the B group said not the US, the UK, and Russia. They should not be in the lead in a future Afghanistan. The C group is, struggling with, what do we do about the Taliban? Or, are they in or out? And so I think this question of who's trustworthy, who should be involved is a really tricky one. So thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Amy.
So I'm here with 3 hats on. I am the founder and president of the board of a resettlement support organization, REACT-DC, which is not a resettlement agency, or one of the others that are an NGO. And I'm the senior advisor for Moral Compass Federation, which is a collaboration of veteran-led organizations working on Afghanistan and other health initiatives for veterans. And then I'm in industry, in the private sector. I work for a government contractor building out their humanitarian operations department. So it is the for-profit side of what we often think of as in an NGO space. There is something that wasn't touched on very much yesterday or today that touches entrepreneurship and governance and human rights and resettlement, and that is the nature of public-private partnerships and NGO-private partnerships. And there is industry in the U.S. that still very much wants to engage in Afghanistan, and not just from a profiteering perspective. It is from an investment in a country perspective, and also an investment in U.S. national security. Let's just be honest. We do not want, or we do not believe that China and Russia have Afghanistan's best interest in mind, and that the contracts that they are forming as we speak with Afghanistan are in the best interest of the people of Afghanistan. Frankly, I think U.S. companies can do better. What they can't do is engage right now when the U.S. and the UN and others refuse to completely acknowledge the Taliban as some sort of governing factor in Afghanistan. And as the ambassador said, it's beautiful to take a hardline approach. There's nowhere to go from there. It makes it impossible for us to invest in the economy of Afghanistan because the liability is simply too high. At the same time, we have NGOs doing wonderful things. We do have public-private partnerships. The sponsorship program that was talked about earlier through Welcome Corps is an excellent example of that, to build capacity to welcome newcomers to the U.S. In what is a cost-shifting mechanism, but a brilliant one. To the U.S. public, and one that they're interested to take on. And I'm very excited that REACT-DC is going to become a private sponsor organization later this fall, and hopefully in partnership with Moral Compass can become a very good pipeline for the second phase of Welcome Corps, which is supposed to be direct naming everywhere in the world to include Afghanistan. That's a very, very exciting thing to get more people to this country. But NGOs, while they are beautiful at a lot of things, are often, frankly, and I'm subject to this as well, terrible at data and metrics. And without data and metrics, we cannot talk about impacts, we can't talk about future policy, we can't talk about where funding should go, because we can't say what we did with the funding that we had. I would encourage everybody in this audience who is a member of an NGO, engaged in an NGO, engage with private industry. They want your partnership. They want to collaborate, and they have a lot to offer in this space as well. While we are in the NGO space often subject matter experts across human rights and entrepreneurship and governance and case management, frankly, on the U.S. side, private industry does have something to offer in terms of overarching structure and, frankly, funding to provide the kind of metrics that we need to inform our government, international governments, Afghanistan government, and opposition forces of what is needed to continue to build in Afghanistan for the future and to continue to engage in that country in a thoughtful way that is productive for Afghan nationals, both here and abroad.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just want to say Taliban are not the Afghan government. They are not recognized by anyone as the Afghan government. So one correction on that. I have attended a number of meetings this morning, but I didn't engage in any discussions because I'm too shy. I'm sorry. All right. Okay. What encouraged me about these different meetings and the debrief today was the fact that the question that in the most meeting, the question that was raised was not necessarily what the United States must do, what the international community must do. It was not even what Afghan elites must do. The question was what we have to do. Although there were questions about United Nations participation in some issues for some practical matter, but the most important question was what we need to do. And I think it's an important question because if you're talking about changing things, if you're talking about bringing some solutions, we need to start from ourselves and we need to rely on each other. And from day one, I have seen people with a lot of hunger for a real and sincere engagement to look for some solutions. Like on day one, I saw Alize saying that we have grieved for 2 years and a half, we have talked for 2 years and a half, now it's time for action. We need to take some steps. And that was a beautiful statement that was said by Alize. So thank you for saying that now. And now I'm reiterating your statement here. We needed a platform. Now we have our platform here. We have engaged, we have connected, and we are moving forwards, and I'm looking for the next steps. And I've heard from Jason that he's going to help us with the next steps, but we also have to make even further steps, using WhatsApp, Google Meet, Zoom links, whatever, to reach out to each other, to talk to each other about the next steps that we have to take. I guess one of the things I want to hear more was about what we need to do while the Taliban are in power. So I'm thinking about we have to separate two questions, and we need to take these two questions very seriously. The first question is what we need to do while the Taliban are in power. And the second question is what we need to do when the Taliban are gone. And the first question is as much important as the second question, because the Taliban need to go away in one way or another. The idea of the Taliban have changed, and the idea of that there's a good Taliban, a bad Taliban, moderate Taliban, and an extremist Taliban, the history have told us, there's nothing like that. Also, I'm not an expert in history, but I think history can give us a bunch of lessons about these issues. One of the lessons is, and I'm talking particularly about, sometimes we heard some people suggested that, for example, some were frustrated, some suggested that their dreams were shattered, some suggested that, for example, they are hopeless or something like that. But one lesson history tells us that Afghanistan has always experienced these violent takeovers, 5, 10, 20 years. And every ruler, every group who took over in Afghanistan, they thought that they're going to live forever and they're going to rule the country forever, so they can exclude whoever they wanted to exclude, right? So the Taliban are thinking like that. But 20 years ago, 22 years ago, the United States came in with the Republic government, and they thought the Taliban were gone forever for 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years. They were never going to come back, but they came back. And the Taliban, 5 years before that, thought that when they had 80, 90% of the country, they thought that they had the country forever, so they do not need to negotiate with Northern Alliance. They just need to keep going. But the Northern Alliance did come back, right? Before that, communists thought that they didn't have to care about a bunch of Islamists and Mujahideen. They can take care of them, and they're going to run the country forever and ever. But that didn't happen, right? And they were defeated. And when we look, we can go further back to the history. But there is one pattern that emerges, and that's the fact that the groups who are excluded are the groups that take over next, right? Communists, even if we start, for example, from Zahir Shah, excluded Dawood, then Dawood took over. Dawood excluded, tried to marginalize Parchamis and Khalqis. Parchamis and Khalqis next time took over. Khalqis and Parchamis tried to exclude Mujahideen. Mujahideen next time take over. Mujahideen try to destroy each other, kill each other, and thought that they could single-handedly rule the country. That didn't work out for them. Taliban excluded Mujahideen. Mujahideen come out next time. And the Republic government thought that they can exclude the Taliban. And the Taliban take over. Now the Taliban is excluding everyone. What do you think will happen next time, right? So that's, I think, a second lesson we can look at. The third lesson, which I think is very important, we have to emphasize on this one, is that if you want to fix the country and if you want to rely on anyone, you have to rely on your own Pashtuns, on your own Hazaras, on your own Tajiks, on your own Uzbeks. You can't rely on some international power holders, but you cannot rely on them forever. Our rulers have relied on British Empire. What happened? They signed agreements, treaties, deals, bilateral, trilateral, and so on. After that, we signed and sought support from the Tsar Empire and the Soviet Union. After that, from the United States. But once they see their interests elsewhere, that's what happened. And by international actors, I'm not talking about Jason, unless Jason is a state or government. I'm talking about the state, or maybe Jason is the president of a country.
Doctor, we're going to leave it there. You've gone into the realm of, I don't want to know that. We're going to move it on just for time here. Let's go to the next guest.
Just one last point I have to make is that the rulers of the country who relied on the international support, as soon as the international support is gone, they collapsed immediately. Sher Ali Khan, Amanullah Khan, Najibullah Ghani. So if you want to build a country, you have to build a country and state that's sustainable without an international support. Thank you.
So I will stick to 3 minutes because I'm a good girl. Yeah. Hello, everybody. This is Malala Habibi. I'm working with International Civil Society Action Network. Thank you so much for the great and amazing presentation. We had such a great discussions yesterday. I was with multiple groups, actually. I would like to start by actually a suggestion and what I would like to see next year with this amazing efforts. Although the women's issue is an overarching issues that could come up with each one of these groups and discussions, but honestly, I would like to see a whole separate group discussing that, because we all know, and there is no need for mentioning again, that the situation of Afghan women are really dire, and as much as we discuss about it and we speak about it, still there is the room and there is the need for further discussion. Like currently we are seeing gender apartheid in the country, and so when it comes to education, to employment, to movement, to even the rights over their bodies, like there are atrocities going on in country, femicide going on in the country. I'm in constant touch with some partners through the organization I'm working through, ICANN, and they are working on the ground, and so many issues as byproduct of cracking down on women's rights is happening. Dear Anne mentioned about the psychosocial needs and the psychological situation of Afghan women. This is very much true and at a very alarming situation because so many suicides are happening, and the situation is really dire. And I would suggest that let's add that to our discussing group for next year, to have a separate group about women's issue. The recurring theme of regional power came up in some of the groups wrapping up, that's very important. I just wanted to mention that whether it's about decentralization, centralization, whether it's about knowing better the Taliban, which one group rightfully mentioned that, on all these discussions, this is a very crucial topic that we should put much emphasis on discussing and trying to find ways forward how we can actually try to know better our neighboring countries before trying to tackle our internal problems. That was something important, but I know I defer to Niloufer Jan, who is expert on discussing about neighboring countries and their rule. And the last point I would like to mention is something that comes hand in hand with resettlement efforts. There has been lots of great efforts about resettlement, and as an Afghan, I'm so grateful for that. And maybe I'm not I'm not well positioned to mention this. I'm someone living in the U.S. and enjoying all sorts of opportunities and freedom, and I'm grateful for that. But I believe that when we are working and discussing the resettlement issue, we should be very careful about the brain drain happening in the country. And we all know that the Afghan fellows coming via SIV or direct evacuation, they were among those that were most educated, know the language, they were experts, they were doctors, journalists, engineers, and the country actually is depleting of its very expert and experienced human resource, which will further fuel the radicalization of the country. And honestly, this is one of my biggest concerns. But again, as a disclaimer, I know that I shouldn't be discussing that as someone who is living outside of the country, but just wanted to mention and wanted to remind all those who are working on policy part of it regarding the resettlement to ensure that that also being taken or being at least taken seriously. And yeah, that was it. Thank you. I think I stick to 3 minutes.
Pretty
or no?
close.
Okay, bad girl. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Niloufer Sakhi. I teach international relations and I also manage a public policy think tank and Diana Foundation. Well, thank you so much, Jason, and Global Friends of Afghanistan and the entire partnering team for organizing this event. I think the most important thing for all of us to continue the discourse. We don't need Afghanistan as a whole, as a topic, to be disappeared from the policy arena. We don't want that to happen. So groups like Global Friends of Afghanistan and many more who are keeping this discourse, I personally am thankful to all of your efforts. It means a lot. And for the time being, at least, if we cannot do anything, we can continue the discourse, we can keep the discourse. That's the important thing that we can do. And all of us in different capacity, we can keep that momentum going. I think that's important. It's a very substantive discussion. I mean, that happened before us, and I assume that a substantive thematic discourse happened during the groups. I think that thematic discourse should continue in a form that a conference should be allocated to one theme. As Maralajan mentioned, one theme would benefit all the participants to generate a productive outcome. So if for the future conferences and events, if we keep the title confined to a thematic focus, I think that way we'll be able to produce a better outcome. In terms of so as I said, I'm teaching and also I'm working with the policy arena. So I talk both from an academic perspective and from a policy practitioner. I see what we can do at this point and what needs to be done. Well, we are facing an extremist authoritative system in Afghanistan. There's less point of entry for people like us and in our international friends. So the point is, where is the point of entry? Do we see the point of entry? When is the timeline when the situation gets ripe for our entry? And then entry means anything: policy entry, practitioners, governance topic that we all discussed. There's a brilliant outcome that came out. But do we think those are realistic at this particular time? And when those all entry point would be realistic? I think we have to wait and see. And that's why I'm saying such discourse should continue in order to further articulate our entry point when the time comes in. So that's what we can do. And I think our international friends should support such events, should continue funding such events, should continue partnering with such events, because this is a platform for us to articulate the point of entry. So that's an important thing. From one point mentioned from an academic perspective now, and meanwhile, from a policy perspective, we should work with policymakers in Europe and America, in order to, first of all, keep the Afghanistan discourse alive. Second, feed them information, whatever information we can. And for that information, I go to using my academic lens, we need first-hand data. Unfortunately, misinformation and disinformation in our age is not providing us enough data to feed the policy. So we need to feed the policy, and to feed the policy, we need the primary source of data. So whatever resources we have, our contacts in Afghanistan, the civil society organization if we are in contact with, try to get that data in any field, starting from human rights violation, governance, service delivery, humanitarian packages, where it goes, and the regime overall service mechanism. So I think we need to get those information, we need to document them and feed the policymakers around the world who are interested in Afghanistan. That is another baby step. I mean, it has been taken a lot. I don't want to say baby step. Organizations are doing that. But I think we should continue that in order to, Afghans should not talk only from media, whatever they get. Afghans talk from the data that they have in hand. And they go to policymakers with the exact data that they have in order to convince the policymakers what has to be integrated into their overall policies for Afghanistan if it has to come at some point. So I think that's what we can do as people and folks interested in Afghanistan, and also our international allies can support us in doing this momentum forward. I stop there. Thank you.
Hosna.
We were given 2 or 3 questions per group, and we came up back with tens of questions, actually. I was fortunate enough to be part of one of the group discussions, plus I've had the opportunity to read some of the papers coming from Afghanistan. There are a couple of issues that have been interesting, but at the same time there are many other questions, sub-questions around them. The first one, even though that we are reading papers and literature starting from 2010 by international experts, where they keep claiming that democracy has failed in Afghanistan or is going to fail in Afghanistan, at least for the last 10 decades. In most of the discussions, that was one of the unifying, I would say, argument that unified everybody was that democracy did not fail in Afghanistan. At least I can say that majority of the groups have been mentioning that. One of the arguments under that form of governance as democracy for Afghanistan was that in Afghanistan, the politics is leader-centric or individual-centric, and not, or the governance form or the governance itself, not institutional or system-centric. So that was one of the issues, and there comes the question of political party system. In Afghanistan, we did have a political party. I mean, a couple of political parties. It was not a political party system, but we did have them, but they also have been individual-centric. And there comes the question of a narrative, which again was one of the, or a national narrative, which again was one of the points that everybody agreed on, or at least the majority agreed on, was to establish a national level narrative. And most of the groups also mentioned about the counter-narrative to the Taliban. So that was one of the, and I do believe that that narrative would help us to unify all the opposition groups. And another question was, what unifies us? I mean, as the Afghans, the non-Taliban Afghans. Some proposed like the Taliban are more than enough to unify us, everybody who are against the Taliban. But what about the population who are neither against the Taliban nor pro the Taliban? They just choose to be silent. So what brings them on board with everybody else? And I do believe that national level narrative, not just being a counter-Taliban narrative or a counter-narrative to the Taliban, but something that can exist beyond a political change that the Taliban would either be would not be leading the country anymore. Another discussion that was out there, and that there have been differences of opinion in most of the groups, was how the future government can look like. Do we exclude the Taliban, or the Taliban can be included? Everybody agreed that it should not be ruled by the Taliban, or Taliban should not be the majority, because they're not the majority population, but how that inclusion or exclusion could look like. Some voted for, and I could see that that was a common discussion among most of the groups. Some voted for inclusion of the Taliban, some are like, no, the Taliban are terrorists and we don't include them. But then I would like to echo what, that's a question actually, what Dr. Saib Mubashir mentioned was every excluded group takes over next. So that is another question that we need to see, to dig into maybe in the future discussions. And when we are talking, there are so many differences in terms of, okay, we want democracy, we want inclusion of the Taliban, or we don't want inclusion of the Taliban. If we include the Taliban because we don't want another insurgency, how a democracy, including the Taliban, can look like. They do have their terrorist groups. They do have a human rights violation. They're not flexible with their policies. How does that look like? But there was another element that was common among all the opinions, was that a realistic government has to be stable as well. Understanding the situation right now, because we did have this definition of a realistic government within the current context, has to be stable, and to have a more stable governance form, human right has to be at the core of it. Inclusion has to be at the core of it. So that was another element. And then I could see that almost every group has been talking about this topic of, that my group, I think, worked most on that, was the centralization and decentralization. And I could see that Group C has been working on community empowerment. So when we are talking about decentralization, some are like, okay, we need to decentralize authority, we need to decentralize the voting system or the election and everything else. Muradian Saib mentioned that decentralization has to be in the form of community empowerment, which I found that theory a beautiful theory. That I do believe there are more questions around that too, that future discussions can dig into that. The last one that I found it interesting was the Islam as a religion in Afghanistan. Can Islam and democracy coexist? And somebody yesterday mentioned in one of the groups that Afghanistan is not a pure Islamic country. And there's a lot of questions, again, that raises a lot of questions again, is that, and the argument was that we have labeled most of our traditions, our customs, with Islam. If that can happen, then most of the elements of democracy can also coexist in alignment with Islam. So that is another, that opens the floor for another deeper debate on Afghanistan being Islamic, Taliban claiming to have established Islamic state. Plus, at the same time, the last 20 years of war, one of the winning points they had, or one of the winning strategy they had, was that at least for their fighters, they had Islam as the core of their legitimacy. So can that, without pushing back Islam, because people are hardwired, when it comes to their Islamic beliefs, can democracy exist together with Islam in a country where more than 99% of the country are Muslims? So those are the discussions that I at least found very interesting, but none of them are responses to any of the questions, because each of them embodies hundreds of more questions. So I do believe that Idea Shura needs to continue, because we need to find what Afghans inside Afghanistan believe, what the diaspora outside Afghanistan believe, and what are in common between the two of them. Because people inside Afghanistan, they're struggling with daily issues, including hunger, including lack of access to education and everything else. We do have the luxury to have the peace of mind to think maybe differently. So we need to, I think the ideas shura would be a point where Afghans inside Afghanistan, outside Afghanistan, the international community who are on the Afghanistan side, we can find a common ground. So I do believe that there's a lot more to be discussed in the future discussions.
Thank you. And especially to Husna John, but to all of them, another tireless worker on this conference, and it wouldn't happen without her, and the Ideas Shura. So a round of applause for our group and their homework for you. So I'm the only thing between you and lunch now. We're going to skip the video. And so I'm going to give you a few closing comments, and I love the homework that you assigned, and there's going to be more, and a lot of things that you said that you would like to see the GFA to be able to do. We're going to continue to do that in the future. We're going to do that in different pieces. Yeah. So I want to, and you can uncue that. We're going to email that out to everybody because I want to keep this on time here. I'm going to start my closing remarks where I started my opening remarks. You know, Isaac Asimov wrote this story, and I want to start with that and end with it. I've seen regions of space that have fallen into lawlessness. The weaker objects, the rapists are kings. Finger is too big. The poor are slaves. Life is nothing but emptiness and pain. And we started this conference thinking, you know, that describes a lot of what's happening in Afghanistan right now, which has happened repeatedly. When lawlessness comes in, that is what it looks like. On the topic of Afghanistan, I am nothing. You in this audience, especially the youth, you are everything. You have heard lots of ideas here today. You've shared your ideas over the last 3 days. Now you must do something with it. You must speak out everywhere you can, write and publish your ideas. Most importantly, you must organize yourselves and your friends, and organize with all the Afghans that are strangers to you or don't see things the way you do. I like that thought that you came up with, that the opposition is united in opposition, but not amongst each other. And that's something to overcome. That is homework. Don't continue to be divided by others into subgroups that would attack each other. If you do that, the Taliban will gain their biggest prize. I have no doubts about that. If Afghans cannot unite around some key principles and create an alternative to the terror regime, the countries of the world will start recognizing the Taliban and the Haqqani terrorists as a legal government. Again, on Afghanistan, I am nothing. You are everything. GFA will continue to help you share your ideas. We can help you learn how to organize, but I suspect you already know how to do that, as you've done in the working groups every time we've put you into them. GFA stands ready to help you, help yourselves. Thanks for spending your time with each other and with us. And you are not destined to live in lawlessness. You are not weak. The rapists are not kings. They are cowards. The poor are not destined to be slaves. They will rise. Life does not have to be emptiness and pain. Do not let the violent and ignorant men like the Taliban and Haqqani stand in your way. Share your ideas, organize, and change your country. Thanks for coming.
Outside, continue, so please go play in the front, and then we have different vendors will get their stuff. So again, thank you very much. Go get lunch. There's take-home plates as well. Please talk to these